Lead Santosh.
Go ahead, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, welcome everyone. So I hope you all have the correct link. So we are now in breakout D. Welcome. It's very nice to have you here. Yeah, as it was described also during the presentation by my colleague Jessica, we of course are very much interested in all your inputs, but perhaps time-wise we can't go through the whole survey. That's why we wanted to break it into 4 groups. So when you are at this link, breakout D, you see that at the top it also says, please start at guidelines, principles, and best practices. So that's highlighted in yellow. So if you scroll down, then that's where you can also find the corresponding questions. So that's from question 21. Maybe it's a good idea if I share my screen so that you all know what I'm talking about. Sorry, I mean also we are looking at the same thing. Just 1 second, please. Yes. I believe you are now seeing my screen. If you don't, please let me know. I will make it a little bit bigger, so I don't know how small. Thank you. It's handy, this emoticons, actually. All right, so you see, of course, you can take a look at the other sections as well, but let's start with here, and if we have time, we can, of course, check the other parts of the survey. But before diving in, I just want to ask, do you have any questions? Is there anything unclear about the exercise of today? Because also if you joined a little bit later, you might have missed the point. So that's why I just want to double check if everything is clear to everyone. Okay. You can stop me anytime, also Santosh, so we are here to just answer questions and work with you. So as you see in this section, we thought of these questions starting from 21 till, let me see. Yeah, questions from 21 till 25. Would it make sense if I just give you a couple of minutes so you have a chance to go through the questions, and then afterwards I ask what you thought? All right. So what about, would it work till 1/4 or is it too short? You can also do a little bit more, of course. I will check at 1/4, ask you if you need more time. If you do, then we will give you a few more minutes. Please take the time. We are quite interested in hearing what you think. Take a look, thinking that, okay, this is not actually suitable for the survey, or I'm missing this. And if you find it useful, you can also, I will just show one last thing. I think you're all familiar with working with Google Docs, but just in case, if you click on here and then click on suggesting mode, if you want to make a change on a specific question, you can directly make it, but please don't do it on the suggest mode. So then it's clear that it's a suggestion. Thank you. For now, I will stop sharing, but please ask if you have any questions. You can also, of course, add a comment if you don't want to make a change, but you want to say something because you think the question could be changed or you don't understand. If you just select the text, then a small box opens up that allows you to make other comments. I can also show how it works, of course, if anyone has difficulty with it.
Hi, Yasmin.
Hi.
The underlines are where people are expected to write in. Is that correct?
Sorry? Oh, that's what you mean. Yes, I know the guidelines. That's what I understand. So it's going to be a conditional question, or am I getting it wrong, Santosh?
So, sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't get that.
For instance, question 22.
Mm-hmm.
So, are you aware of any data sharing guidelines? Yes, I know the guidelines. Then there is a gap. So that means that you say yes, and then there's another optional question asking what guidelines you're talking about.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the idea, right?
yeah. That's my understanding as well. Yes.
Thanks for clarifying.
I've a kind of more basic question about the disciplines.
Yes.
You're using the kind of high level categories of those. Another several of these. Is that detailed enough for what you want to get out of this?
I guess that is part of that can be part of your feedback as well, because we've categorized it in ways we think would capture sufficient variety so that sufficient guidelines can be provided. But yeah, if you feel a field isn't captured in the descriptions available, or it's conflating with others that it doesn't really belong in, please do let us know. But that is part of the feedback we're hoping to get as well.
I would have a rather general question as well on the questions 21 and 22. You ask about guidelines and restrictions. What kind of restrictions were you thinking of? I wonder whether this might be clear if I had the time to read the entire questionnaire, whether this has been explained earlier, or because like this, I'm not quite sure what kind of restrictions I meant.
So the thing is, we put questions, all of us together, so it could be that these questions are put by a colleague, but that's why we are. I think what is meant there is that, for instance, if you're working with human data, there are some restrictions, therefore you can't just openly publish the data. I believe that's what's meant there. Do you have a suggestion, Santosh? Do you also think?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was GDPR for me. So yeah, I think that's exactly the thing.
Or it also could be that in, especially we see it with, for instance, engineering, but it's also, we see it in design fields that there is some commercial reasons because they want to apply for patents or they work really closely with some private companies. That also could be a restriction because of that. So, for instance, yes, I'm aware of the restrictions of due to the personal data or due to IP considerations. That could be an answer, but I think this is a note for ourselves. This should be cleared. So thank you very much.
But I think if you just say, are there any restrictions for not disclosing any kind of data, that makes it clearer. Restriction as such is a bit vague, I think.
Thank you very much. I will edit right away.
I have a similar question as I forgot who just asked it earlier. I feel so when I read questions 21 and then looking at 22 and 23, I feel 21 seems, because it's guidance and restrictions for research data management, that's much broader and probably also includes the data sharing and publishing that mentioned in 22 and 23. Because when I read the 21, my first thought was, oh, I would actually think of the guidelines or restrictions from my institution, because that's for general research data management, rather than the disciplinary ones you mentioned, like for handling, for example, medical data or other type of data.
Actually, with the explanation you gave, I wonder now whether the restrictions have a place in question 21. First, the question 21 is on data management.
So, sorry, could you repeat that, Mary?
But I totally understand now the restriction question 22, which is about sharing the data. But question 21 is about the actual data management, and even data that should stay confidential needs to be included, for example, in a data management plan. So I wonder whether there would be restrictions for data management, or whether this question is not needed for question 21.
Okay.
No, you're right. That's a very good point. Santosh, you captured that one?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I'm adding that. I'm adding that to 21 right now.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, really. I will try to go through also some of the comments that were already put. But meanwhile, if you want to turn on your mic and say something directly, please feel free to do that. Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
This might just be me because I'm new to this working group, so I don't have the same maybe background as other people. But for my understanding, so that to know with my comment, my thought is that if this survey is intended to go out to researchers, there's quite a lot of expectation within these questions that they already have some knowledge about. I mean, I know there is the answer, no, I don't know, but I'm anticipating that you could get a lot of people just ticking that, and that might be useful information for you. So I am a data management librarian, so big part of my role is reviewing researchers' data management plans, and especially when it comes to the things like guidelines and restrictions, they're often the bits where the researchers, especially if they're postgraduate researchers, don't have any kind of existing knowledge, and we're providing them with that guidance and saying this may be applicable, or these university policies are applicable, or whatever. So I'm just kind of highlighting that in case you don't get as useful information from some people as maybe you're hoping, unless that's just kind of what you're hoping to try see whether people have any idea or not what it even means by guidelines for these things.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Eleanor. So yeah, it's a combination of both. You were right. So it is good. It'll be good for us to know that if some researchers are not familiar with the idea at all. It also collides with the idea of we'll be spreading the survey out. So we were hoping to get a really representative sample of all researchers to get to the survey. But feedback on that, it's going to be a combination of both, and that's also what we're looking for. So thank you for that.
Related to that, we do try to make it as clear as possible in terms of the terminology, but it might always be the case that we think it's clear enough, but actually it's not. So also it's a good question. I was checking also the comments. So for instance, Jan asked, do you mean the concept of metadata standards or disciplinary standards here? It's a good one. And that's also there come the question, actually, what is a metadata standard? So that's something we need to keep in mind. And we will keep your comments on so we can also clarify that better. Thank you. May I ask Angus about his comments? So you put, should learning resources be included as a generic term? Okay, so that's for the guidelines, principles, and best practices. So that's, you mean as a headline, and do you also want us to add a question about that, or?
So in other discussions I've had about learning resources, we often talk about guidance materials being part of those. So I guess I'm looking at it from the other way around. When you ask about guidance resources, are you also asking about training materials, other learning resources that people would refer to?
It's actually a good one. I will put it.
Sorry, Angus, I don't think I quite understood. If you don't mind repeating, sorry.
So learning resources of various kinds can include guidance material. And so can guidance material include learning resources is my question. I think it could be interesting to look at the guidance materials as learning resources because there are standards for learning resources, you know, for managing them, for describing them, which could also be applied to the guidance materials for DMPs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm looking again at the comments. Yeah, so that's a good question. Also, Angus mentioned about will respondents be able to distinguish from data sharing and data publishing? That's something that happens often also in general with the data management plan. And I completely agree, just quite an important one to clarify it. I think we are interchangeably using those words, and for a researcher point of view, that's not always clear. So thanks for putting that comment as something we should pay attention to be consistent.
May I add to that, perhaps not only to be consistent, but have a small introduction explaining the two. So if you want to get the feedback not only from those that are already kind of very much into the topic and know about it, but also have the researchers' views that are new to the topic, then I think explaining exactly that difference between publishing data and sharing data and the difference between fair data and open data might be great.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good advice. I'm also noting it down so that I don't forget. Okay. Again, I'm looking over the comments, but if you want to share something, you can also just turn on your mic, or you maybe so far you see like 5 questions in this section. Do you think this covers? Do you have suggestions, or you don't have to come up with all the multiple choices, but if you were the one who was designing the survey, what would you want to ask? There is something that, for instance, we didn't think about it.
Maybe one thing I'm wondering, because I remember in the last working group meeting, there was a very nice discussion about should the guidance be discipline specific or data type based, like specific. So I'm wondering, because for now in these sections, what the section is about guidelines, principles, and best practices, and only the discipline is mentioned. Yeah, so I'm just wondering whether there should also be some question about guidance for specific data type. But on the other hand, I can also imagine that may also make this survey confusing for some people. So it's really just a pure question and curiosity.
I think that's a very valid comment. That's something we heard multiple times, and you're right. So we should actually more focus on that with the whole survey design. I agree with your point. Because indeed, it's not only discipline. I'm just not seeing at this moment exactly how to do this properly. But it's a very good point.
Also, yeah, also I'm wondering, because it seems probably makes sense to some research groups that focusing on the type of data rather than discipline, but probably also for others, the discipline makes perfect sense for them. So it is really probably very, yeah, it's the diversity of the reality, I guess. There is, I don't think there's a perfect balance there yet.
Yeah, in the other part of the survey, we do ask questions about data types that they use. If you go to the earlier part of the survey, so like we said, we've split the survey into parts so that we'd have enough time to review each part, at least somebody. But yeah, there are questions on data types earlier, and we do get that information. I think the hope is that within the discipline of multiple data types we use, then we can provide all the guidelines that would be needed. But what you said, yeah, that is correct. Yeah, we would have to focus on that. But I think this section probably doesn't address that quite as well. But there are questions on data types. I think if you go up to, let me quickly. I think question 5 through 8 have that aspect of it.
I also see a very good question. I think it's from Marie, but about Science Europe. Is that correct, or am I?
Where is the question? Sorry.
So it's under the feedback on the question. So I was
Okay,
also
sorry.
capturing, but we also got a question there. Is it from you, Marie?
Yeah, actually, it's not. I'm reading with interest at the moment.
With me, sorry.
August, please, can you? Yeah, you're right. That's a very good point. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, if you don't mind?
Well, there was that nice work that Science Europe Working Group did on domain data protocols, which I think is a similar idea to what you're aiming for. And I think the main characteristic of a domain that was mentioned was the research methods used, or the methods to collect data in a way, which is, I guess it's similar to data types, but it depends what you mean by data types, doesn't it?
So yeah, so that's an excellent point, Angus. I think it might help if if you scroll up to say question number 5. So it says, I'll just read it out so that maybe it's easier. Data means a source of information used to answer research questions, but not everyone calls these sources data. What terms would you use to describe the sources of information you used in your research? Multiple answers are possible. So this I hope addresses what you're getting at, because yeah, it's not targeted at methods directly, but the hope is that we can glimpse a little bit of that through data types here.
We also do ask, actually, for instance, at question 7. So again, if you can scroll up,
Yeah.
how you collected. So that's also a bit of the methodology, but I think we need to clarify that a little bit more. And still, even there, I mean, when you say experiments, for instance, experimental setup for chemistry research would be way different from, for instance, a biology. Those are even relatively closer. So what I'm trying to say is that it's, I think, a great point, but I just have a little bit myself how to reflect it through the whole survey. This is what time. But I wanted to actually ask if Marie wants to say something about this topic. Sorry that for putting you on spotlight again.
No, no worries. I think my main comment would indeed be, again, apologize, but I don't know the entire survey, but the document that Angus pointed out to, I just put the link in the chat. Basically, Science Europe has issued 2 guidances, one more generic, which is the guide that you're referring to, with this in the description of the working group. And we have another document that stems from 2018, which I just put the link in, which refers more to the discipline-specific elements. So the idea is to use both together. The core requirements from the guide should be reflected in any guidance for any discipline, and then the discipline-specific one on the domain protocols could give you some hints on which aspects to look into additionally. So these are basically, in a very generic way, the fields where we see major, that there could be major differences between the disciplines. So I think, and I put this in a comment as well, I think things like data protection of personal data can be extremely important for some disciplines and less for others. So these kind of things, need to be taken into account. And I think then if you go to the 2018 publication, you could cross-check whether all points that we identified a few years ago are in the survey.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was also a little bit something, perhaps it's relevant to discuss, unless anyone has a further comment about this section, because indeed, if you scroll to the bottom, we have the possible additional topics. Also, I see a comment that you should definitely include those. Please go ahead. Yes, I wanted to indeed ask you. I'm sorry, I just, how do I say your name properly? Sorry, I want to properly address
you muted, sorry.
It's next to the camera icon. You need to click on the mic icon and it should say on. It's not working. I'm really sorry.
Could you type in the chat maybe, or in the feedback document? Either would be great.
Maybe it helps actually if you go to SRC.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Now? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know why that wasn't working. Right, so I took the liberty of going through the entire document because you guys were doing such a good job looking at that particular section, and I didn't really have much more to say. But I noticed that licensing wasn't mentioned in any of the previous sections of the document. Data volume is another good thing to figure out, because especially not just for the researchers themselves, but for the institution or the funders, it's a good piece of information to have in terms of building capacity. And a DMP is a valuable resource for that. So, and yeah, I think you should include a provision for sensitive data. And sorry, I wasn't actually paying attention to who was speaking just a moment ago, but sensitive data was just mentioned, I believe. So yeah, definitely include some provision there, I think, for the survey respondent to indicate whether they are dealing with anything that's sensitive in nature. But you do say earlier on as well that legal and ethical requirements, so I suppose that fits into there as well. As for those other 2 questions, I suppose they could be asked. I don't think they're as important, but they could be included as well.
So just a question. We did, for instance, have a discussion among ourselves about data storage. So with data volume, if you're only talking about the volume itself, yeah, then it doesn't maybe say much on its own, but then you'd want to know what kind of, for instance, yeah, for instance, just an example, if you have different data needs, your institution highly likely doesn't offer that, so you need to purchase some solutions on your own. So that was something we had a little bit difficulty to address.
So earlier on, you do talk about how, I think you mentioned, let me remind myself, I think earlier on in the survey, not just in the section that this breakout group was looking at, you do talk about different storage options, I think, and sharing and publishing, which is fair enough. That's great. But I think you could just make a multiple choice and saying, like 1 gigabyte, less than a gigabyte, hundreds of gigabytes, that kind of thing, just to give a relatively crude indication of the amounts of data that might be generated. For instance,
That's
mhm.
so sorry. Please continue. I thought you'd finished.
Well, for instance, like a sequencing project for a genome that generates several, I actually don't know, but it's a lot. It's several gigabytes, and whereas some research hardly produces any real data, and I use data in inverted commas there, and it could be just kilobytes, literally. So, there's a pretty big spectrum there.
No, absolutely. In fact, an earlier version of this survey did have a few questions, as Yasmin mentioned, with the ranges from few gigabytes going up to terabytes. So we did have a few questions.
Yeah,
the reason we dropped the question was the idea being that we're trying to get responses in the context of disciplines, and we wondered if the questions were about volume, whether it would the response would be more. For example,
I think depending on the domain, the subject, I think you'll probably find that certain subjects will be generating more than others.
No, I think that's great. I think that makes a good case to put the question back in. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And you certainly need to be talking about licensing.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to ask. So there, do you mean also a bit differences between Creative Commons licenses and, for instance, more proprietary licenses, or do you also mean the difference between data and software, or also in a different level? So that would actually really help if you can share a little bit. What do you mean?
Yeah, I suppose we're generally talking about Creative Commons here.
Yeah.
I mean, on my travels, I've rarely encountered any other form of licensing when it comes to researchers, anyway. And if this is more geared towards researchers than anyone else, then I don't think you really need to worry about any other licensing type. If you're talking more from a back-end sort of issue, like the repository or something like that, then you might be talking about specific licenses for that. But as a researcher, I think Creative Commons is sufficient. And just to see whether they are adequately aware of the different Creative Commons license types, beyond just CC BY or CC 0, are they aware of commercial restrictions that you can place, that kind of thing.
Sorry, please go ahead, Sandra. No, I just wanted to ask, so you think there could be differences that some disciplines, for instance, work with, I don't know, CC0 and some more work with CC BY and C, for instance. So you think that could be something to observe?
Yeah, I think there could be. I mean, certainly, when you look at one of the more pioneering research domains when you think about good RDM is astronomy. They've been doing it for decades, it seems, and they've been making their data fully open all through that. But then when you're talking about things that might include things like genome sequencing, that kind of thing, then you do start getting into murkier waters. But can you make this data fully open because of ethical implications, etc.?
Okay. Thank you. I was just going to follow up because you mentioned predominantly CC. One of the other things, licenses we see commonly, at least in my university here, in my faculty, is also MIT, Apache, others for essentially code. Do you deal with that? Do you have anything on that as well?
No, I'm sorry. Not me personally, but I could look into it maybe.
No, yeah, no. What you said about Creative Commons, and that's very true. But essentially, the two things we deal with are probably Creative Commons, and the other ones being licenses for code. So that's essentially that probably covers almost all of it.
And
so I'm just wondering what you had thought on that.
Yeah, and there are various others. I can't think right off the top of my head here.
But yeah,
Angus, can you help me out?
Sorry?
I mean, there's an awful lot of social science researchers use specific user agreement licenses, which, I mean, this question could get very complicated.
Exactly, I agree, and this is why I'm thinking just stick to Creative Commons, just because it's the most frequently used or the most pertinent, perhaps, to the average researcher. You could put another option saying other, but concentrate on Creative Commons. Sorry, Angus. Yeah, I agree.
But to be honest, I'm not sure what you're trying to find out in asking that question.
Okay, I'm just thinking more about what if some researchers are actually inclined towards making their data restricted in some shape or form. I guess justifying it as well. They should be aware of why they are restricting it too.
Would it be worth to turn it around and check whether they need support with IPR and licensing?
Okay, sure. And of course, they may be mandated to do so. It might not be up to the researcher. It might be institutional or funder or policy. I'm not saying it's the researcher that's making this decision.
That's a good point. Thank you, Atcha. I try to capture that, and I've seen that myself recently. I even didn't know what kind of license it was. So it happens sometimes that indeed you get also this user agreement licenses. So it's good to maybe indeed generalize it. I think we, when it is 10 to 4, we go back to the main room so that each group can report. First of all, again, apologies that we can't go through the whole survey, but we really appreciate your feedback so far. And if there's anything more you want to share, you can, of course, put any comments on this Google Doc, as you have been doing now, also for other sections, only if you want to, of course. So we are not asking you to work more. And thanks again for bringing the guidance documents also from Science Europe. Of course, we should do our best that we align as much as possible also with the discipline-specific research data management work that has been already out there, definitely. Is there any last minute question before we go back to the main room?
I'd just like to add, if you've not added your name to the attendee section, please do, just so that we can come back to you and follow up if we do have any other questions. Apart from that, I just want to reflect what Yasmin said. Thank you very much. It's been really, really important and useful feedback.
And this one question, is any one of you actually interested in reporting back what happened in this room? You don't have to, only if you want to. If you don't want to, then one of us will take it, obviously. Okay. I take it as a no. No problem. I understand. Bishta asked that question at the beginning of the breakout. Apologies.
Unfortunately, I wasn't fully paying attention at the start to what you
No
guys were
worries.
doing, so I'm not going to volunteer myself.
No worries. But also, we should have asked this question at the beginning. Apologies, it was too late. So I just want to say you can scroll down on this page, and if you click on back to the VG discipline specific guidance for the MPs, then you will be back at the main session.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And Santosh, do you want to do it, or
I'm fine. Do you want me to do it? I can do it.
if you like, because then I will do the discussion part with the Mentimeter, if it's okay for you.
Okay, yeah, perfect. I will do the feedback, yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
See you in the main session.
Yeah, so it's a little bit mixed at the moment, but
Yeah, no problem. I'll essentially look through. I mean, the comments are there, and I will just hit the main points. Yeah.
Okay. I also highlighted under the feedback on the questions. I saw you also put some notes there, so it's a little bit mixed, but I think you will.
It's fine, and it's not like we're going to hit every single thing. So it's all right. We'll be fine.
Okay. See you at the main room.
Yeah. See. Yeah.